Well, welcome to Ask a Responsive Fundraiser, where we take your questions to a fundraising expert so that ultimately you can grow generosity. Today, we're taking your questions to Carly Berna. Now, Carly's the Director of Product Marketing here at Virtuous, and previously she was Chief Marketing and Development Officer at JVMI, a large nonprofit, where she served for over 10 years. Carly earned her MBA from Pepperdine University and has taught marketing courses at the Pepperdine Business School. Carly, thanks so much for taking the time to answer some questions today.
You know, I always wondered what it would feel like if someone read an extensive bio of mine, and now I know how uncomfortable that is, but happy to be here, Scott.
It is for everyone. We appreciate you sitting through it. You did a great job.
Yeah.
Let's jump to the questions, all right?
Okay.
The first one we have is this. We put a lot of effort into our campaigns, but we aren't sure what's working and what isn't. So what metrics do you rely on to evaluate the success of a fundraising campaign? And how do you use those metrics to improve future efforts?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I know in the nonprofit space and the fundraising space, sometimes it feels like there's so much data and it's like, where do you even start? You could cut the data in so many different ways that it can seem like this campaign is doing great because we got 100 people to click on it, but terrible because no one actually donated, and that was the goal of the campaign. So First, I would say it's important to start with what is the goal. Is it an engagement campaign? Is it a brand campaign? Is it an acquisition campaign? You're trying to get new donors, or a cultivation campaign trying to get current donors to give. And then from there, set the goals. I'm going to focus a little bit more on acquisition because I feel like that's one that it's a little bit harder to figure out what the metrics are. Because when you do an acquisition campaign, sometimes the upfront metrics look terrible and you're like, I'm never going to do this again. But then in the long run, it was a big mistake to never do it again. So for an acquisition campaign, and again, this is acquiring new donors, whether it's through digital media or a direct mail campaign or television or radio or whatever channel you're using, you want to look at a few different metrics. The first is an upfront ROI. So what are you getting upfront, the cost versus the revenue? But you want to tie that to kind of a long-term ROI. So if we want to break even within 2 years, which is kind of a best practice when it comes to acquisition, we need I'm just making up numbers now. We need a 0.3 ROI upfront. And the reason that I'm making up numbers for the upfront is because it depends on what your average gift is. So if your nonprofit gets a massive average gift upfront, then you don't need as many donors upfront. Or if yours gets a smaller average gift, you need more. So you need to look at your nonprofit specifically to do that. And you kind of want to take this class approach. So if these donors came in 2022, you can go back and look at the history, and now it's been 2 years. What's the ROI of that campaign? So you can get an idea of how long it took for it to break even. But the goal really is to look at both a short term and a long term, because if you're only looking at short term and you're we're losing money, you're going to cut all of that acquisition, and then your donors, you're just not going to be able to fill in the gap as your donors continue to stop giving or your donor retention isn't as high. So important to look at both upfront and long-term. And I'm going to do a shameless plug here, Scott, sorry, but
we invite it.
Virtuous has a benchmark report that talks about the 7 most important fundraising metrics, and it goes through all of these. It explains them in detail, what their descriptions are, how to actually calculate them, and then also gives information on if this is a metric that you should focus on, what are some tactical ways for you to improve? So it's a shameless plug, but it's also super helpful and beneficial. And I wish I had something like that as a fundraiser, because it's just a great place to look to be what should I be doing to improve this metric?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next question. It's time for our nonprofit to have a brand and messaging refresh. We want to attract more supporters with a fresher look and messaging, but we don't want to lose existing donors. So how do we do that without losing our identity or confusing our existing donors?
So I'm going to answer this question with a question, which is, why do you want to have a brand and messaging refresh? I feel like sometimes we're always looking for the new shiny thing. If we just update our logo, everyone's going to start giving to us because it's going to be so cool. So I would say before you even start doing a brand refresh, definitely ask yourself why. But second, do a brand survey. Do a survey of your donors. Even if you can't afford to hire a research firm to do that, which I would highly recommend that you do, because they can come up with questions that are worded in a way that aren't leading, and ask your donors exactly how they feel about your brand. Because honestly, you might be surprised. At my old role, we did this and we asked all sorts of questions and we're like, wow, they actually understand our brand better than we thought they did. Maybe we shouldn't do this whole other brand refresh that we think we're going to do. But you can do it low-fi as well by like sending out like a basic email survey to some of your donors just to get an idea of the answers to some of these questions, or call your major donors and ask them. Like, listen to your donors before you decide to do a brand refresh, because they're obviously the ones that are going to respond to it.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful question for a lot of things. Like hearing the voice of your donor and really understanding them can just make all the difference.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Number 3, using AI is coming up more and more. Now, as a nonprofit, trust and community building are extremely important to us, and using AI feels like a bit of a gray area. So what should we avoid using AI for at our nonprofit? And how can we ethically use it to enhance our donor experience?
Yeah, this is like such a hot topic right now. You know, anything with AI, we're all interested in because we're not exactly sure how to use it. I would say the big do not, which it might sound obvious to some, but not to others who aren't as familiar with AI and how the tools work, is don't upload anything that is private to your nonprofit. So don't upload donor data, even if you're trying to figure out like, hey, can we calculate these numbers, or can you give me like a summary of this data or whatever. Don't upload your donor data. Don't upload any donor names. Say you're asking it like, hey, can you write this receipt copy for this specific donor? I wouldn't upload any donor names or any proprietary information about your nonprofit, whatever that may be. If it's something that you don't want to get out to the public, don't use AI for that case. But there are lots of great ways that nonprofits can use AI, especially with what I'll call like public information. So if there's information publicly, like think maybe on your website, that you can upload into something like ChatGPT. I'll just give like an example. Maybe your CEO has written a book and you're like, hey, we want to take this book and we want to write him a script so that he can do like a short video about this. Or we want to create like 10 blogs out of this book. That's a great way to use AI. Obviously, the book is public, so all that information's already out there. And now you're hopefully writing a script in his voice. You're writing the blogs in his voice. So that's something that would have taken a writer probably hours to do as they read it and try to write it. The other thing that I think it's super helpful for, and this is so technical, is if you're working in Excel or you're working in like website development or something and you come into like a technical problem and you're like, why can't I get this formula to work? Or like, why is this coding breaking? Or why can't I figure out, like, ask AI those questions. They will answer it so much faster than you. Even if you just Google, like ChatGPT will answer that question way faster than you searching through all of the different forums on Google. So it's a great source for that. And I also feel like it's kind of like my brainstorm assistant. So like if I can't think of an idea for something, or I just need like some fodder, I ask it a question, again, using public information, like, hey, you know, this is the type of organization I work at, and we want to create some engaging email content. And, you know, what do you think? It could give you 10 answers you hate, and you can just say, hey, give me 10 more. And maybe there's something in there that you can grab and be like, okay, this would be a great idea. So it's just helpful for a handful of those things. But again, just making sure you're keeping your donor data, any sensitive data, private, and using public information to help you.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Carly, thanks so much for taking the time to share your wisdom, your expertise, the things that you have learned with our audience. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.